Snow fell quietly over Pinewood Village, coating the streets in white as villagers prepared for the annual Christmas festival. The air smelled of pine and smoke from chimneys, and children's laughter echoed through lanes decorated with twinkling lights. Then, without warning, the first bulb flickered and went out, followed by another, until every decoration vanished, leaving the village in heavy, unnatural darkness. It wasn't a power outage. Candles glimmered, fireplaces burned, but the festive magic had been stolen, as if something had passed through the town in the dead of night, leaving only shadows behind. The cheer turned to whispers. Uneasy glances exchanged as villagers felt unseen eyes watching from the edges of the streets. And beyond the last flickering lamp, a faint glimmer beckoned, a trail into the woods no one dared follow alone, promising answers that some might never live to uncover. The evening in Pinewood Village had begun like any other Christmas Eve, with the air rich with the scent of pine, gingerbread, and wood smoke drifting from chimneys into the crisp winter night. Children's laughter rang from every corner, and the streets were alive with neighbors putting finishing touches on their decorations, strings of colored lights glimmering faintly in the early twilight. The village square was a bustle of activity, where families gathered around a massive evergreen, placing ornaments, and children ran about dragging sleds over the snow-dusted cobblestones. It was a picture of warmth and celebration, the kind that filled the heart with anticipation for the long-awaited festival and the magical night to come. And yet, as the hour crept past 7, an odd stillness began to settle over Pinewood, unnoticed at first by anyone engrossed in the festivities. A single light atop the grand evergreen shivered, dimmed, and went out. A collective murmur spread among those nearest, a tiny ripple of confusion that barely interrupted the songs being sung by the carolers. Another light died, then another, until a line of once bright bulbs along Main Street flickered and faded as though swallowed by the shadows themselves. Panic began to creep in, subtle at first, as the realization dawned that this was no ordinary outage. Electricity hummed faintly beneath the streets, fires burned in homes, and lanterns glimmered warmly in windows. Yet every Christmas light in the village, without exception, had been extinguished, leaving the town cloaked in a strange, unnatural darkness. The laughter, the music, the cheerful chatter of neighbors, all seemed to dim in response to the sudden emptiness. And for the first time that evening, a shiver passed through the villagers. People stepped cautiously into the square, their faces pale in the muted light of the winter moon, glancing around at the familiar streets that now seemed alien and distorted. Whispers grew louder, questions forming like frost along the edges of conversation. How could every decoration vanish at once? And why had no one seen it happen? Windows that had previously glowed with cheer now reflected only shadow, and the emptiness of the streets seemed to press inward, making even the most confident villager hesitate, as though the village itself had paused, holding its breath. No one spoke of the legends, not yet, but a sense of unease settled deep, an instinctive fear that something unseen had moved through the town, watching, judging, and taking. The festive magic that had filled the streets for decades felt stripped away in an instant, replaced with a cold, observing silence that pressed against the ears and whispered to the heart that the village's Christmas was no longer theirs alone. The villagers stood in uneasy silence, trying to comprehend the sudden disappearance of every Christmas light. A small group of teenagers found themselves drawn toward the edges of the square, where shadows clung more tightly to the corners of the buildings, and the air felt colder than before. Among them were Ella, a sharp-eyed girl with a curiosity that often led her into trouble, and her friends, Jake and Maya, who had grown up wandering the woods and alleyways of Pinewood, always chasing stories half-remembered and legends half-whispered by older residents. Their footsteps crunched softly on the snow as they moved closer to the tree line at the edge of town, the absence of illumination making every sound seem amplified and every shadow a possible threat. Then, through the gloom, they noticed a faint flicker, so subtle it could have been mistaken for a reflection off the icy snow, yet it pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat guiding them deeper. The glow was unlike any electric bulb they had ever seen. It shimmered with a silvery, almost liquid light that seemed to move independently, weaving around trees and rocks, drawing them toward the forest that had long been the subject of whispered warnings. Hesitant but compelled, they followed it, the village behind them now eerily quiet, the familiar street lamps offering only feeble reassurance as they faded further into the distance. Halfway into the trail, Maya stumbled over something hard buried in the snow. Kneeling to investigate, she unearthed a small ornament, its surface dulled by age and snow, yet engraved with a symbol that sent a chill racing down their spines. It was intricate and unfamiliar, a twisting pattern that seemed almost alive, etched deep enough that it caught what little moonlight filtered through the bare branches. The ornament emitted a faint glow of its own, pulsating in tandem with the light trail that led further into the forest. No one spoke, yet a shared understanding passed among them. This was no ordinary decoration lost by a careless villager. The air thickened, carrying a faint hum, barely audible but unmistakable, vibrating through the soles of their boots and up their spines. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if waiting to see what they would do next. Ella reached out, trembling slightly, and picked up the ornament, feeling a strange warmth seep into her fingers. At that moment, the forest seemed to close around them, shadows deepening, branches twisting like grasping fingers. The trail of light stretched farther than they could see, leading them into the unknown, and with every step, the whispers of Pinewood's old legends felt closer, alive in the frost-bitten air, reminding them that some mysteries were meant to be approached carefully, and some lights could guide the way, or lead the unwary to consequences they could never have imagined. The teens emerged from the edge of the forest and made their way toward the one place in Pinewood Village where they might find answers. The home of the village historian, Mr. Whitmore, a reclusive man whose presence had always seemed entwined with the town's oldest stories. His house sat on the outskirts, half hidden behind a tangle of frosted evergreens, windows glowing dimly against the dark night. The wind carried a biting chill, tugging at their coats and raising goosebumps along their arms as they approached the weathered door. Ella rapped lightly, and after a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow hall lined with towering shelves, each weighed down by leather-bound tomes and yellowing manuscripts. Mr. Whitmore's eyes, sharp and pale, studied them with an unsettling intensity. When they explained the sudden vanishing of the Christmas lights, he remained silent for a long moment, as though weighing the consequences of telling them what he knew. Finally, his voice cut through the quiet, low and deliberate. "Pinewood has always had a watcher," he said, gesturing toward the fire, which flickered weakly in the hearth. "Not a man, not a spirit like you might imagine. The villagers call it the Silent Watcher. It appears only when the town has strayed too far from what Christmas is truly meant to be." He led them to a table, covering it with a thin layer of dust, and spread out several old documents and sketches of symbols. There are records of years, decades even, when the lights vanished, the air grew heavy, and children spoke of shadows in the trees. The Watcher does not harm without reason, but it tests the village. It seeks proof that the people remember the heart of the season, the selfless acts, the kindness, the giving. If it finds none, the darkness lingers longer. Jake leaned forward, squinting at a sketch that bore an uncanny resemblance to the ornament they had found. Mr. Whitmore's gaze followed his finger, narrowing. "That symbol," he said, "is the Watcher's mark. Wherever it appears, it is a trail, a challenge, a summons to face what has been neglected. Pinewood's children often glimpse it first, because innocence sees what adults refuse to acknowledge. And this year, the trail has begun again." The room seemed to grow colder, as if the house itself shivered at the mention of the Watcher. Shadows gathered in the corners, and even the fire seemed to dim as the historian's words sank into their minds. The teens exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that what had started as a strange outage was in fact a test, and that the mysteries of the forest, the vanished lights, and the glowing ornament were all part of something far older and far more deliberate than anything they had ever imagined. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, carrying with it a warning that the Silent Watcher was already observing, and that the night had only just begun. The trail leading from Mr. Whitmore's house into the forest seemed darker than ever as the teens returned to follow the glowing footprints, the snow crunching beneath their boots sounding unnaturally loud in the heavy, frozen air. Each step forward brought an oppressive stillness, as if the world had shrunk around them. The village behind now only a distant glow swallowed by the forest shadow. The light from the ornament pulsed faintly in Ella's hands, casting an otherworldly shimmer over the gnarled roots and icy branches that lined their path. And with every flicker, the shadows appeared to move just beyond sight. At first, it was subtle, a branch swaying though there was no wind, a figure caught in the corner of an eye that vanished when directly looked at. Then the whispers began, soft at first, barely audible, like the rustle of dry leaves, calling out fragmented phrases, half laughter, half warning, seeming to emanate from the trees themselves. Go back. You shouldn't be here. The lights mustn't. The voices wove through the forest, carrying with them a chilling urgency that set their hearts racing. Jake tried to shine his flashlight along the trail, but the beam only revealed more darkness, shadows that seemed to deepen in response to the light, stretching unnaturally, twisting, and then vanishing. Maya stumbled over a thick root, and when she looked up, she swore the snow around them shimmered as though alive, the footprints in front of them rearranging slightly, guiding them deeper into the woods. A sudden gust of wind blew through, carrying faint, melodic strains of long-forgotten carols, each note echoing in a way that seemed to follow them, harmonizing with the thrum of their quickening hearts. Tommy shivered, sensing eyes upon him that weren't human, yet nothing emerged from the darkness, leaving only the pressure of being watched. Every step they took seemed to awaken more of the forest itself. Icicles jingled though there was no breeze, frost spread along branches in intricate patterns, and faint glimmers of light darted from tree to tree, teasing them forward, daring them to continue. Even the ornament in Ella's hands grew warmer, pulsing like a heartbeat, guiding them through this labyrinth of shadows. It became clear that the forest was alive with a purpose, testing them with strange illusions and whispered warnings, drawing them closer to whatever force had stolen the village lights. Each eerie occurrence heightened their anxiety, yet they pressed on, knowing instinctively that retreat was not an option and that every strange sight and sound, every shifting shadow and whisper, was a sign they were on the path to understanding the mystery of the vanishing lights and the silent power that now observed their every move. The deeper the teens ventured into the forest, the heavier the air became, thick with frost and the faint metallic scent of something ancient and unspoken. The glowing footprints led them to a small clearing, encircled by twisted evergreens whose branches arched overhead like the curved ribs of some immense, invisible creature. In the center, patches of snow glimmered with a strange, almost liquid light, forming patterns on the ground that shifted subtly, as if alive. It was here that the first words appeared, etched into the bark of an ancient oak, faintly glowing in the dim light. The messages were cryptic, lines carved in elegant, looping script that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of the eye, compelling the reader to step closer, to understand what was being demanded. Face what you have neglected, one line whispered. Your pride blinds you. Your haste destroys. The teens exchanged uneasy glances, realizing instinctively that this was no ordinary puzzle, no childish prank meant to frighten wanderers. The forest itself seemed to lean in, urging recognition of guilt, of choices made without thought for others. Ella felt a weight settle on her chest, memories of selfish moments over the past year pressing into her mind. Harsh words spoken to her younger brother, times she had turned away when someone needed help, moments of envy she thought had been harmless. Jake, usually skeptical of such notions, shivered as the shadows around him seemed to twist in reflection of his own doubts and small acts of unkindness. Maya's eyes widened as she read the glowing script, realizing that her own small vanities, the teasing of others, moments of thoughtless laughter at someone else's expense, were recorded here in the forest's silent judgment. Even Tommy, so young and usually fearless, faltered under the weight of the invisible gaze that seemed to track his every thought, every hesitation, every selfish desire. The forest pulsed in rhythm with the ornament in Ella's hands, as though the glowing talisman confirmed the veracity of these reflections. Each teen was forced to confront not just the external mystery of the missing lights, but their own internal shadows, the intangible failings and neglected kindnesses that had accumulated over the months. The clearing, the glowing script, and the shifting light demanded something more than cleverness or courage. It demanded honesty, humility, and the willingness to act selflessly. Every whispered phrase, every flicker of light, pressed them toward a choice, testing whether they would rise to meet it or falter beneath the forest's silent, expectant scrutiny, aware that the fate of the village's Christmas depended not only on their bravery, but on the willingness to reflect, repent, and ultimately, to give without thought of reward. As the teens lingered in the clearing, the shifting patterns of light began to coalesce, forming a shape that was neither entirely human nor entirely shadow. It emerged slowly from the trees, gliding without sound, its presence commanding the stillness around them. The air grew colder, carrying a faint hum that seemed to resonate with the beating of their hearts, and the snow beneath their feet appeared to harden, forming a crystalline layer that reflected the pale glow of the floating figure. The Silent Watcher, for that was what the stories had named it, observed them without speaking, its gaze sweeping over each teen with an intensity that felt like piercing ice, weighing their thoughts, their memories, and their intentions as if it could read every secret they had never spoken aloud. Fear gripped them. The forest, which had seemed alive with mysterious energy, now felt predatory, waiting for their next move. Tommy clutched Ella's sleeve, his small hand trembling, and even Jake's usual skepticism faltered under the scrutiny of the figure. The Watcher's form shifted subtly, elongating and twisting with a grace that defied natural movement, yet every flicker and pulse of light that traced its edges seemed purposeful, deliberate. Then the whispering began again, this time unmistakably directed at them. "Do you understand why I have come? Do you remember what has been forgotten?" The teens, though silent with fear, realized the question was not for them alone, but for each of their hearts, an interrogation of conscience more than words could convey. The shadows around them deepened, bending toward the Watcher, as if the forest itself had become an extension of its judgment, each tree and branch leaning in to witness their response. Ella, with a shaking breath, stepped forward, her hands outstretched, as though offering herself not in defiance but in honesty, acknowledging the selfishness, the impatience, and the indifference that had crept into her actions over the past year. Maya followed, her voice quivering but clear as she spoke of moments when she had ignored others' needs, and Jake admitted, quietly, the times he had put his own convenience above the safety and happiness of those around him. The Watcher remained silent, yet with each confession, its form shimmered and pulsed, the ice beneath their feet vibrating faintly, as if confirming the sincerity of their words. A cold wind rustled the branches, carrying away the final whispers of judgment, leaving only the forest's stillness and the radiant light of the ornament pulsing in Ella's palm, guiding them toward the understanding that fear alone would not restore the Christmas lights, but courage, honesty, and the willingness to act selflessly might. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the teens, hearts pounding, realized that the weight of their confessions had shifted something in the frozen air around them. The Silent Watcher's form, once so imposing and foreboding, now glimmered with a soft, almost welcoming light, its shadowed edges dissolving into the faint glow of the clearing. The snow beneath their feet began to sparkle, each flake catching the ethereal light as if reflecting the sincerity that had been poured forth by the group. Slowly, the ornament in Ella's hand grew brighter, humming gently in resonance with the Watcher's presence, guiding them back toward the path leading to Pinewood Village. Every step they took carried a strange warmth, replacing the icy tension that had pressed upon their spines for hours, and the whispers that had haunted them faded into a silence that felt laden not with judgment, but with anticipation. As they emerged from the forest edge, the first faint gleam of returning Christmas lights flickered along the rooftops of Pinewood, shy and hesitant, as though testing the villagers' readiness to embrace what had been lost. The group stopped to watch, their breaths forming clouds in the cold night, and realized that the return of the lights was not instantaneous, but a gradual affirmation of the selflessness and care they had displayed. Families peered out of windows, blinking in disbelief as strings of bulbs ignited, one by one, and the village square, once shrouded in unnatural darkness, began to glow with warmth and familiarity. The town's children laughed, tentative at first, then with unrestrained delight, as if sensing the magic that had hovered just beyond the town's boundaries had finally acknowledged them. The elders whispered among themselves, recognizing the signs they had feared yet secretly hoped to witness, and even the snow seemed to fall with renewed gentleness, dusting the rooftops and cobblestones in a pattern that sparkled like starlight scattered across the earth. The teens, exhausted but exhilarated, realized that the silent watcher's purpose had never been to frighten, but to remind the villagers, and themselves, of the true spirit of Christmas, the quiet acts of kindness, the moments of care given without expectation, and the courage to confront one's own failings with honesty. As the last of the lights flickered into full brilliance, the forest behind them seemed to recede, leaving no sign that the watcher had ever been there, except for a faint shimmer along the tree line that would disappear as dawn approached. The village of Pinewood was alive again with color and celebration, but beneath the surface, an unspoken understanding lingered, that the magic of the season was fragile, woven into the hearts of those who embraced it fully, and that the mysterious events of the night would be whispered about for years to come, a story that would haunt and inspire, reminding everyone who heard it that some mysteries were meant to test, to teach, and to endure.